Hello, Mark Sabatella from Outside Shore Music here. In this video, I'm going to talk about applications of species counterpoint to real music. And I'm using as an example here the Pachelbel Canon, which is a super familiar piece to many of us, and I've used it as examples before, but it actually works really well for the purpose that I want to talk about here. Now, species counterpoint is a very specific way of looking at the relationship between two voices, and it's often taught as if it's like some pedagogical thing that only applies to certain music and we never really use it. But I want to show you how it can apply, first of all, to music that is real, to music that is also more than just two voices, and how it's actually quite practical. So, if you're not familiar with the idea of species counterpoint, you can look up other videos on that, but I'm going to briefly talk about the species as I go through this piece. The first passage we have here is first species, one-to-one counterpoint, one melody note against one bass note here. So we have one against one, right? And this is a third, and then a fifth, and then a third, and then a fifth, and then a third, and then a fifth, and then a third, and another third, and it ends, the next phrase starts with an octave. So we have nothing but thirds, fifths, and octaves. We have nothing but consonances, exactly as the normal kind of rules of first species counterpoint suggest. The next phrase is also first species counterpoint between that top voice and the bass, and now we have an octave, a third, an octave, and a third, an octave, and a third, an octave, and a fifth. And then it also ends with an octave. But we can also look at the relationship between those top two voices and say, here we have third, 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 and it ends with a sixth. So every individual pair of voices is following the normal conventions of first species counterpoint that says let's always have consonances here and avoid parallel fifths and parallel octaves and so forth. The next phrase is second species counterpoint, and I'm really just going to focus now about the top to the bottom, the top voice and the bottom voice. We have octave, third, octave, seventh. There's our first dissonance, and it's approached by step and resolves by step. To the fifth, and a third, an octave, another dissonance, another seventh, approached by step and resolves by step. To that fifth, a third, an octave, a fifth, an octave, a third, an octave, seventh, the dissonance approached by step and resolving by step into the third in the next bar. Eventually, we get to that second species counterpoint, two against one. The dissonances were on the offbeats and were both approached and resolved by step. After that, we come to third species counterpoint where we have four against one. So octave, seventh, octave. Well, that's a neighbor tone. It's approached by step, resolved by step. Then down to an octave. A third, an octave, a fifth, and a sixth. These are all consonances. And then a third, a ninth, which is a dissonance, but it's approached by step, resolves by step, right? And then a fifth, and then an octave, a third, a fourth, and this fourth here is dissonant, right? It's a dissonance because it's against the bass voice, and he does leave it by leap. Well, this is an escape tone. This is something that maybe you don't do in your third species exercises, but real music does use what are called escape tones. And so that's what's going on there. Now we have octave, seventh, approached by step, resolving by step to a sixth, octave, right? So these are mostly consonances. The dissonances are mostly approached and resolved by step. Third, ninth, approached by step and resolved by step to octave. Seventh, which is a dissonance, approached by step and resolves by step to the third. Ninth, dissonant, approached by step, resolved by step to that octave. seventh again, approached by step, resolves by step to this fifth. A little leap into this dissonant seventh here. This is what we would call an appoggiatura, or we could just say that we are arpeggiating the chord, since we are now thinking about chords a little bit. That seventh, though, resolves by step to that sixth, and then a fifth, and then an octave, and so forth. So good third species counterpoint there. And then if we work a little further into the piece, we eventually end up with a really clear example of fourth species counterpoint, where the top voice offsets. Basically the same kind of line it had before, but it's offset. So check this out. There's a fourth resolving down to a third, right? The D to the A was a fourth, resolving down to a third. And now we have a ninth resolving down to an octave, and a fourth resolving to a third, ninth resolving to an octave, fourth resolving to a third, seventh resolving to a sixth, and then, that really happens on that fifth there. So, did I say those right? Let me say those again. Octave, and that becomes a fourth when the bass goes to A. So now we have a fourth resolving to that third, and now we have a ninth resolving to an octave, and now we have a fourth resolving to a third, ninth resolving to an octave, fourth resolving to a third, seventh resolving to a sixth, which then becomes a fifth, right? So it's really good textbook fourth species counterpoint here. And then eventually you get passages where the rhythms are varied. There's some offset rhythms, there's some quarter notes, eighth notes, dotted eighths and sixteenths, and all those dotted eighth, 16th passages there, all the 32nd note passages that happen also. That's fifth species counterpoint that says you can freely mix and match all of these. So we can see in Pachelbel Canon good examples of all of these techniques being used very effectively, and it happens to be a canon of sorts on top of that as well. So if you're looking for an example of how the idea of species counterpoint might apply to real music, look no further.